For more on China's military spending, we are joined by Dean Chang. He's the senior advisor of the United States Institute of Peace. Dean, so the NPC spokesperson said that China's defense budget has maintained a relatively moderate and reasonable growth rate. Would you agree, given the current geopolitical environment?
Well, certainly the Chinese learned a lesson from the Soviet Union, which overspent on defense. But I think it's important to look at how China's defense budget has been increasing relative to its broader economic growth rate. For a very long time, Chinese defense budget increases were less than the projected increase in the overall economy, meaning that China was spending less proportionately speaking, or was increasing less. Now we see, for example, this year, a 7.2% increase when the Chinese economy is only expected to grow by 5%. So we've seen a flip. China's defense budget is now rising faster than the economy is expected to grow.
Yeah, as you highlight, economic growth was a priority over defense capabilities, but it appears that trend is changing now. Do you expect to see that gap continuing to grow and continued increase in defense spending, even if growth doesn't pick up in China?
I fear that what the Chinese have long termed the period of strategic opportunity, meaning low prospect of international war, and therefore a much higher priority on economic growth, is coming to an end. That what we are seeing now, and we've seen actually for several years prior to this, is a closing of that period of strategic opportunity, which means that the Chinese seem to be now prioritizing defense spending over even economic growth. And yes, I think that that might actually be the new trend looking forward for the next several years.
So, Dean, with a ramp up in the military budget going forward, should we be bracing for a more combative, a more aggressive stance from Beijing towards Taiwan or South China Sea in the near future?
Certainly, the People's Liberation Army will now have increasingly all of the means that it feels necessary to do whatever the political authorities ask. So basically, by 2027, the expectation is that if Xi Jinping says, you need to invade Taiwan, that at that point, the PLA will not have any excuses. Oh, we need a few more years of modernization and the rest. The other thing to keep in mind is that the Chinese are not simply buying weapons. They are buying all of the support, the logistics, the electronics, all of the support systems that modern militaries need, as we've seen in Ukraine, which means that not only are the Chinese likely to be more aggressive in terms of flights across the Taiwan Strait midline, but that they will probably be more aggressive when it comes to intelligence collection.
Let's probe that a bit more, Dean. Do we have any sense of where Beijing will be allocating these additional dollars? What does this budget tell us about possible shifts in its military activity?
We've seen the PLA ground forces steadily lose priority ever since the early 2000s. So I think we should expect to see, above all, expansions in China's the PLA rocket force. We already know that there are substantially more missiles apparently being built and now deployed to Western China. We probably should expect to see a lot more space capabilities. Space is seen as an absolute priority for informationized local wars. Cyber capabilities will increase. And of course, air and naval forces, simply because the Pacific is an air and maritime domain.
So, how worrying is this expansion going to be for countries or territory that are in contention with China, like the U.S., Taiwan, Japan, India? And how concerned should we be that this could actually lead to some form of arms race in the region?
Well, I'm glad you brought up India. One of the things to keep in mind here is that we have seen Chinese and Indian forces clash on the border. These are both nuclear-armed countries. And while both sides have taken steps to ensure that they don't walk around literally armed, we've seen deaths along the border there. So that is one of the less noticed zones that I think could easily escalate if tensions increase. We've seen increasing Chinese crossings of this Taiwan midline. That too increases tension between China, Beijing and Taipei, and could draw in the United States. Japan is now openly talking about China as a security threat. So I think the region as a whole is becoming steadily more dangerous.
There are indications that China has considered 13 countries for military basing access, though currently they only have one on the Horn of Africa. What is the potential, Dean, for conflict to stem from Beijing's push to establish new large-scale military bases overseas?
I think major powers, as they develop broader sets of both international relations and security ties, inevitably start seeking bases overseas. And in and of itself, I don't think China establishing more bases overseas will necessarily increase tensions with any of its neighbors. However, when we look at, for example, China's ties to Pakistan, where that could create more of a concern is, of course, in India, which sees Pakistan as its primary security concern. So closer Chinese-Pakistani ties, for example, if China establishes a base at Gwadar or elsewhere, could easily escalate tensions. I know that some of the discussions has been about places in Africa. There, I think that that's much more likely to be seen simply given the scale of Chinese investments in the region as essentially assurance, making sure that China's investments are safe. Yes, it will increase concerns on the part of a variety of states, but China is actually a Johnny-come-lately when it comes to foreign bases. So I don't necessarily think that that is grounds for absolute concern.
All right, Dean, thank you so much for your time and your insight. We've been speaking with Dean Chang, a senior advisor of United States Institute of Peace.